Hey, good day, everyone. It's Alan Schimmel, DevOps.com, and you're listening to another DevOps.com webinar. Thanks for joining us today. I know with the holiday season and end of year, everyone's rushing around, trying to fit in their last couple of items on their checklist, but we've got a really great webinar today that I think you're all going to enjoy. Let me first of all mention that our webinar today is sponsored by our good friends at InfluxData, so many thanks to them for making this possible. Today's webinar is how to handle the realities of DevOps monitoring today. Before I introduce our panel members, I want to say that we have set aside time for questions at the end of today's webinar, and nothing makes for a better webinar than some great interactive questions from our panel. We use the GoToWebinar control or the GoToWebinar platform here at DevOps.com, and that means many of you have the GoToWebinar control panel in your upper top right-hand corner of your screens. If you look in there, you'll see a section marked questions. And if you click the little arrow so that it's downward facing, it should expand. And you can see that you can actually type your question in there. If you've got a question with something that occurs early on in the webinar, you don't have to sit and try to remember it or jot it down on your desk to ask later. Type it right in real time. It gets queued. We have it ready, and we'll ask our panelists. If for some reason we got so many questions that we didn't have time, we can get your question answered offline for you. So we know your questions are important. It also makes for a great webinar. So please put your questions in there as they come into your head. Don't wait till the end when the rush is on, and that'll be great. However, if you're having technical difficulties, slides are not advancing, audio's not working, or some other mishap, but you can still get to the chat section of your GoToWebinar control panel, please just type your problem in there. We do have engineers standing by who will try to help you and get the most out of your webinar experience. That's really all we have right now. So let us get started. As I mentioned, today's webinar is brought to us by InfluxData, and it is how to handle the realities of DevOps monitoring today. And I might add tomorrow. I mean, things are constantly changing here. Our panel today, two great folks. First of all, I want to introduce Eric Lin. Eric is VP of Operations for DevOps Cloud and TechOps and at Influx. And then we have Chris Chirillo, Director of Product Marketing. Some of you may have seen a video Chris has done that's out on DevOps.com. If you haven't, I strongly urge you to go check it out. It's on DevOps.com there. Chris, Eric, welcome to the webinar.
Thanks for having us.
Eric, good. That was our sound check, guys. All sounds good. With that being said, I'm looking forward to learning on this one. It should be a great, informative webinar. Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Lin. I've served in a VP of Operations role at a number of different companies. Monitoring has been a core part of my responsibilities to ensure that environments are always running and healthy. In the new DevOps culture, development cycles are much smaller, and we are releasing changes much more rapidly. Comprehensive monitoring is more critical than ever, not just in the production environments, but also in pre-production. The earlier we can catch an issue, the more effective we are at producing a clean release quickly. I've experienced challenges firsthand building out monitoring solutions which can keep up with the rapidly changing applications in all the environments. In the next few slides, I'm going to touch a bit further on this topic. So can we move on to the next slide? Okay, so what do we mean by DevOps monitoring? First, it helps to understand what we mean by DevOps. It is the close collaboration between teams involved in applications development, infrastructure deployment, and management. This includes key teams such as development and operations, thus the term DevOps. These teams closely collaborate to improve the speed at which we can safely release code changes into production. With rapid development changes, monitoring is necessary to catch issues quickly. The last thing you want is to catch the issues in your production environment when they are impacting real customers. Unfortunately, it can be very challenging to implement monitoring, which can catch every issue that can arise within an application. In my previous companies, we worked very closely with the development teams to build custom health checks for each application. But when you're dealing with hundreds of different applications with rapid release cycles each, it was a challenge to keep up. It can be very helpful for development to provide a consistent method of verifying the health of each app, which gets updated as necessary with each release, maybe via API. At one company, our development team built a small health check which lived on one of our critical servers. We triggered it via connection to a particular port on the server. It would verify the functioning and performance of the application all the way to its database. If healthy, it would simply respond with the number 1. We added monitoring with that app to our central monitoring solution as well as to the load balancers, which would automatically take these servers out of the pool if they were not performing well. Move on to the next slide, please. The ultimate goals are to shorten development times, deploy much more frequently, and produce much cleaner code. Monitoring along every phase of the development cycle will help us to catch the flaws earlier so we can fix them sooner and save valuable time in the overall cycle. Ideally, you would also have workflow triggers for every alert. It is the next level up in automating everything. For example, at a previous company, we were having issues with JVMs intermittently freezing up. Every time that happened, the support team would come online to troubleshoot, but would ultimately reset the JVMs to restore service. We were able to save time and customer impact by building a trigger in our monitoring to automatically reset the JVM as soon as it was detected to be hanging. Just about any steps you go through manually to resolve an issue can be automated. Keep in mind that it's very important to have all of your test environments and monitoring of those environments consistent with your production. We caused a lot of confusion one time when a simple function on one of our apps was failing in production after it tested perfectly clean in the lab environments. Something got modified in the labs that we didn't catch because the monitoring was also not completely set up like production. It wasted a lot of valuable time in troubleshooting, redevelopment, and testing. Move on to the next slide, please. At a high level, how does monitoring help in DevOps? First, collaboration. Monitoring can provide feedback on all the layers of the stack, enabling the different technical teams to quickly collaborate to optimize performance and availability. 2, automation. Monitoring is the automated detection of issues. The more monitoring that is in place within all stages of the development cycle, the less manual work will be required to catch the flaws, and the detection process will be much more reliable. You also want to automate as many tasks as possible to speed up successful deployments and ensure optimal consistency. Automatically triggering workflows from monitoring alerts is part of this. Next, configuration. A good monitoring solution will provide flexibility to configure what you want to see and alert on. DevOps environments can change rapidly, so it's important to have the capability to quickly adapt to those environment changes. And finally, sharing. Monitoring provides a rapid way to share with a wide number of different groups at the same time and is a key part of collaboration. Different teams can quickly act upon the data to make improvements to the application and the environment as necessary. A good solution will allow you to provide reporting specific to each target audience. For example, your executives will want to know the overall health of the environments, but not necessarily how much packet loss we're getting on one of those links. So the monitoring would be configured to generate a different report for the network engineers who are most concerned about specific health issues across the network. Next, Chris Trillo will go over the benefits of time series data and the Influx data platform. Thank you.
Actually, before we go on, I think I'd like to just expand on some of the topics that Eric just talked about, because I think they're worth really noting. I think the last point that you made, Eric, I think is critical when we talk about monitoring. I think it's really easy as technical folks that we start to build these dashboards that really look at the what's actually happening in our infrastructure, right? It's really easy for us to look at things like jitter or latency and have all those metrics being thrown up on a dashboard. And you are absolutely right in saying that those things are important, but how do they actually translate to the line of business owners or the executives, right? What they're really keen to understand is, can our users log in and can they interact with the solution so that ultimately we can generate revenue? So for them to see a dashboard like that shows, the bits and bytes of what's actually going on is not going to accomplish that. So it's important that we build our dashboards that fit the right audience. Very simply put, if we think about the executive needing some kind of a dashboard that says, is this solution healthy or not? Yes, no. And then going down the human stack, you might want to have something different for your support teams, because the support teams, what they want to do is they have to field these calls from their users. And if a user says, I can't use the reporting functionality, then your support teams would love to be able to have a dashboard that they can go to that says, yep, the login section of the application is working. The reporting UI looks like it's working. Oh, but the database that's supporting the UI framework is not working. And so, yes, you're absolutely right, Mr. Customer, we are having problems. Or if everything's a green light, it could be something else, and they can potentially better troubleshoot with the user, because maybe it's something in the user's environment. And then, of course, there are the people in the various teams that are really building the code or actually trying to help to deploy the code. They need to be able to look at, what is actually happening in the event that, some of the triggers are being hit that, are indicating that things are not working. So I think it's a really good point that you bring up, Eric, and it's important that we always consider our audience. I think a second point that I just want to talk a little bit more on, Eric, is, so on that point, Eric, so do you have any, maybe I'll let you think about this as I go to the next point, but maybe you could share with us any other examples of that kind of miscommunication that maybe the technical teams have with the exec teams in trying to communicate, what's actually happening in the environment. So I know I kind of put you on the spot there, so I'll let you think about it, and I'll just go to the next point that I was thinking about as you were talking. And that point is that, the thing about DevOps is it's a culture that we're all trying to infuse within our organizations so that we can do a lot more collaboration, and we can ultimately achieve the ability of rolling out changes to our services at a much more rapid pace. But the thing that's nice is monitoring actually helps to make that get into your culture, because you wouldn't be able to, even do the 4 things that Eric articulated on this slide of collaboration, automation, configuration, and sharing if you weren't monitoring. So, I think what I'm starting to realize, listening to Eric, is that monitoring is actually really central to making sure that DevOps actually can work in environment. Otherwise, how do you even know if things are actually working if you aren't actually watching the systems? So I think, it has a lot more credence than I think a lot of people are at least at a higher level, are giving it. And then, the final point that I just wanted to articulate a little bit on that that Eric was talking about is that we need to monitor all our environments. And I think if you've been a developer, or if you've been in operations, I think the story that Eric, you brought up, we've all got the scars from that, where yeah, we have 3 or 4 different environments and none of them are looking the same. And so when we implement stuff, the monitoring isn't implemented consistently across the board, so we can easily miss that. But I think another thing that we probably should do better at explaining to our leadership teams is that we need to monitor all those environments. I think they have a bit of a misconception that monitoring is only done in the production environment, because that's where, your users are interfacing with your solutions. But if you ultimately want to have a culture and environment where you can insert change constantly, that means you need to monitor all the environments that you're inserting this change. It can't be just limited just to production. And so I think there needs to be some education with our leadership and our line of business owners that needs to happen. It's not like the old ways of just having that QA environment as this thing on the side where the QA team is just kind of testing stuff. We actually have to have the same kind of rigor in monitoring all those environments like we do in production, so that we can go faster and faster and make sure that we can mimic appropriately. So Eric, so you have any other thoughts about these topics?
I think it's tough for me to think of a very specific example for the very first question that you came up with. I can't recall when we've actually run into a big problem because of not sharing the data, but it's very important to just keep in mind that all of the teams and all these groups are very busy. So you really want to provide the data that they really need to do their jobs. So if in our reports in the dashboard, say we provided all the fine details to the executives who really didn't need to know that information, they're going to spend a lot more time just weeding through that information, and it can get frustrating for some of these teams. So things function a lot more smoothly. People are a lot more effective at their jobs when you provide what data is really important to them.
That's a really great point. And, you know, I think the other thing that we forget is that we know that there's a whole bunch of different monitoring solutions that are, you know, collecting all the data out there. But, you know, a lot of times these the other teams aren't really certain about what we are collecting or what we can collect. And so communicating with them and letting them know, you know, what is available and, you know, can we satisfy their needs, I think is just paramount. And especially in this age of what we're calling the age of instrumentation, where, you know, it's not just about monitoring just your software and your servers. I mean, monitoring is really starting to expand across the board. So we're seeing so much what we're calling sensification of the physical world, where we're seeing a lot more sensors, a lot more metrics that are being collected for anything in factories or on our physical bodies. We all carry various monitoring solutions to monitor our heartbeat, our steps. We have other consumer products that might be monitoring the temperature of our homes, going into, you know, even various stores, monitoring how many consumers are walking around. There's just so much that's happening because the collection of that data is, I think we've seen very successfully in kind of the DevOps arena, very helpful to understanding what's happening. Are there some behaviors that we should consider? Are there some patterns that we're seeing that can make us make our services, you know, that much better? So we're seeing just a lot more instrumentation happening across the board. But, you know, it's not just about collecting the data. It's about collecting it, well, instrumenting whatever it is that you want to take a look at so that we can collect the right kind of data. And you're going to be constantly instrumenting things to as you learn more about the data. And then it's about looking at the data and understanding, you know, why is this data the way it is? Is the thing that I'm monitoring broken, or is it already performing optimally? Or there's some things that I need to consider to make things a little bit better or slower? Does it need more storage and more memory? Does it need something else? And then the next step is all about learning from that data. Now that I know that, you know, this data is always going to be at maybe a 90th percentile, then maybe I don't have to have the warning bells go on so early. I can have some confidence as I'm looking at all this historical data that maybe those thresholds can be set even higher, or maybe not, right? It's all about trying to understand what's going on. And then as Eric was talking about, then we can really be smart about automating these things. I mean, ultimately, we'd love to live in a world where everything is in that kind of a self-healing mode based on the data that we're collecting. But, you know, it's a cycle. We all have to we have to pull all that data in, look at it, observe it, understand it, try to build some automations, and then we'll also make a lot of mistakes along the way. But the good thing is those mistakes are not everlasting. We're able to actually, you know, do something about it so that we can learn from that and make things ultimately better for our services and our customers. So any kind of performance data that we're looking at, you know, whether it's in a DevOps kind of infrastructure, or maybe if we're looking at business metrics or any kind of IoT type of data, all that data is basically time-stamped because we want to understand what's changing from 1 minute to the next. And so we call that time series data. And in this kind of data, there are basically two different patterns that we typically see. The first is what we call regular time series. And so these are things that happen on a regular heartbeat. This is also referred to as metrics. The other data is what we call irregular time series, which is basically, these are those spikes that don't happen on some kind of a regular heartbeat. And it's important to understand both these types of data because sometimes they can mean very different things. You know, at first blush, you might think, oh, these irregular events, they're always going to be some kind of bad anomaly, but they might not be. So it's really important to understand, you know, when they're occurring, what they're trying to tell us. And sometimes we even have to manipulate some of that data by looking at averages of some of these irregular time series data to understand, is it something that I need to be worried about, or is it actually something that's quite normal in my system? The other characteristic about time series data that is important to note is that you'll very quickly start collecting lots and lots of data. So when we first start just instrumenting something as simple as our servers, we might think, oh, I just want to collect these 3 elements. But over time, as we're learning more about our solutions, we start to realize, actually, I'd like to collect a little bit more information. And next thing you know, it's in giant, big, huge amounts that's coming in. And not only are we interested in collecting more different types of data, but we'll want to get that data in smaller and smaller time intervals. So just imagine just collecting, 10 bits of metrics in a 1 second or 1 millisecond interval. I mean, in just 24 hours, you start to understand the volume of that data. And it's important because if we're trying to find what's going on in real time, then we need that data, because there's a bit of sensitivity towards that, because ultimately we need to fix problems that could arise that potentially this data can let us know about before it becomes a real big problem for our customers. And this is across the board on any kind of a solution. And in this next slide, what I'm actually showing is, very different situations where these companies are collecting various time series data to understand performance. So with SAP, what they are really keen to understand is, are they able to, one, hit their SLAs that they have, their commitments that they've made to themselves and their customers, but also are there some other kinds of insights that they can actually gather from the data that they're using to support those SLAs to understand maybe they have to make some kinds of changes. And sometimes these changes could be impacting to the users in the form of price changes or product offering changes, not just buying more servers to make things work better. Bbox is an IoT use case, and what they have done is that they have actually surprised themselves by, when they were collecting the time series data, initially they thought they were just using it to monitor the health of the solutions that they send out to the field. So they're basically an energy producer for people living in rural Africa, and they allow their users to be able to buy energy on a consumption basis. But since there's no grid out there, they actually send a solar panel and a battery to these different individuals so that they can get that energy. So initially they were just looking at those systems to understand the performance, so that if there was a problem with the battery storage or with the solar panel, they could quickly send out a replacement. But what was interesting is that they were able to gather that data and actually start to understand the usage patterns of the users, and were able to come up with new offerings that actually matched the usage a lot better with their customers, really ultimately increasing the customer satisfaction of their customers. Wayfair is another great example of really trying to make sure that they can instrument their business with the collection of all these metrics. And the thing that I think a lot of us don't realize with them is that they actually have a lot of importance riding on the Cyber 5 holiday weekend. Turns out a lot of us buy furniture from them and a lot of other furniture makers during that period, because we're trying to prepare our homes in time for Christmas. And but the way that we actually buy furniture is very different nowadays. In fact, they were telling me that they have to make sure that all the customer experiences are working for them. We buy furniture using our phone, our tablet, our laptops. We buy them at all hours of the day and night. And so they have to make sure that they can collect enough metrics so that they can ensure that that customer experience is optimal. At the same time, if their marketing teams or their operation teams want to insert any kind of a change, they decided by looking at some of the data that they want to actually have a sale on pillows during that week, they have to be able to allow them to make that change. Maybe there's a couple pages that are performing a little slowly. They don't want to stop that change from not getting in. They want to be able to bring it in. But as Eric was talking about, it was also really important for them that as they're building out that change, they monitor that change in development so that they have some assurance that when they put it into prod, it's gonna work. Because ultimately, everyone's just trying to make this better experience for everyone. Nobody wants to insert any kind of poor experience for their customers. And then we have a couple of other examples too, with a spend management platform, SaaS platform called Coupa, as well as New Voice Media. And, I think ultimately one of the things that they're definitely trying to move away from is not only ensuring that there's a great customer experience, but they just want to make sure they can avoid that nasty tweet that could come from a user that says, hey, your service isn't working. And then the response that the ops and devs team have back to the executive of, oh, well, we didn't know about it. Our monitoring solution was only polling stuff in 5-minute intervals or 1-minute intervals. There's nobody, not the user, not the exec, that will accept that answer. So making sure they can pull stuff in as real near time as possible and address the situation before it becomes a problem is super important. So we're at InfluxData, and we are actually an open source company, and we have a platform that allows you to be able to do the things that we were just talking about earlier. So the ability for the dev and ops teams to be able to collect all kinds of different performance data on their IoT sensors, if that's the application that you're building, on your actual infrastructure itself, on your servers, your databases, your containers, etc. You can also collect it on the various business metrics, which could be things like transactions for a bank, or maybe document uploads for an insurance company. Whatever is the metric that that is really going to help to drive revenue can easily be brought into a time series database. And then, the other thing that we're seeing, a lot of users also do is taking it to the next level, also looking at things like logs and traces, because they can also be really good indicators of what's happening within your application framework. And so collecting the data is just the first step. First of all, instrumenting your code so that it can collect the right kind of data, or data that you might want to have, is the first step. Taking a look at that data and then learning from it are the next 2 steps. And then, potentially putting in some automation to create that self-healing solution is the next step. But it's not the final step. I mean, we intentionally put this in a circle because as you're learning and automating from this data, chances are you're going to want to add even more metrics to the mix. So then you just start over again and start adding even more, start instrumenting your code even further to try to see what else we can take a look at in the actual overall solution. So at InfluxData, some of the things that are important in order to facilitate these steps is to understand that as you are collecting that data, you're going to get a lot of data. So being able to ingest that at a high rate is very important. At the same time, you don't want to gobble up all your storage. So making sure that that data can somehow get compacted is critical. And then, as the data is coming in, you're going to actually want to start looking at it. So being able to query that data in real time to understand that change over time is kind of the whole point of this thing. So being able to do that with your data is important. And then, finally, what we're seeing a lot of users do is then taking that what's now becoming historical time series data after, a few minutes of collecting it, and trying to figure out, is there a way that I can use that for forecasting purposes? And so they typically will throw that into their machine learning framework to try to make sure that they can start to build those predictions. And then ultimately making sure that, you can actually do something with the data with the automation. But also what's interesting about time series data is that you want to also be smart about what you want to keep, because over time, the precision of that data might not be as important to you. So being able to automatically downsample the data, or evict some of that data in an automated fashion is really important. I mean, nobody wants to dedicate time every week or every day or every month, whatever it is, to do that manually. Being able to just kind of set a parameter in your solution and have that happen automatically is just going to make things work very easily. So at InfluxData, we have a set of open source projects. Our most popular one is called InfluxDB, and it's a time series database that we've built from the ground up. So it's not based on any other database technology. And It has a number of capabilities that will help to support time series data. Some of the stuff that I mentioned about being able to have high writes, high reads, also being able to downsample that data very quickly. But it's also really meant to be sitting under the various solutions that you're building. So it could be the monitoring solutions that you already have in place. It could be your SaaS solution. It could be your IoT application. Whatever it is that you're collecting metrics from, you would throw that into an InfluxDB instance to be able to manage that very efficiently and with without a need for a whole group of personnel supporting it. The other 3 projects that we have that are tied to it is we have our collector agent, which is also, these are all also open source, Telegraph. There's over 200 collector agents that are out there that you can use to throw into InfluxDB. But the popularity of Telegraph have also made it so that you can actually use it with other backend data stores as well. We have Chronograph, which is just basically the visual interface for InfluxDB. And then Capacitor is our data streaming processing engine. So if you wanted to do that further manipulation, throw it into an incident management solution like a PagerDuty or VictorOps, or if you wanted to throw it into your machine learning framework or even any user-defined functions, you could do that via Capacitor. So these are all open source, super powerful. I recommend everyone taking a look at it. You literally can get up and running in just a couple of minutes, and there's no dependencies, and you don't have to have a whole army of people to support it. It does really well, and it actually supports a number of commercially available products that are out there on this open source version. We do also have 2 commercial versions. Some users have asked us to host InfluxDB, so we have a managed service version called Influx Cloud. And then we've had some large enterprises that have asked us to add some clustering and security capabilities, and so we put that into Influx Enterprise in the closed source version. But we have a lot of open source instances that are running on some really amazing projects. So don't be shy. We appreciate the fact that a lot of our users are existing very nicely on the open source projects, and we hope to remain that way going forward. And this next slide is just showing just a little more details about these open source projects. So you can just see, you can collect data via Telegraph. Alternatively, you can actually throw data into InfluxDB versus HTTP or a set of client libraries, completely up to you. And the other thing about these 4 open source projects is that you don't have to use all 4 of them. You could just use InfluxDB, which a lot of our users do. Some of them use it with Telegraph. Some have used all 4 projects. It's completely up to you. You don't have to use all of them. And you can also just make sure that it just migrates with whatever projects that you have going on. So maybe initially you may not want to use a Telegraph plugin. Maybe you just want to write in directly into InfluxDB. But over time, as your architecture is evolving, InfluxDB can easily move forward with you. So it's not so prescriptive in the deployment. Our core focus is on developers and builders like everybody who's joined us today. And with that, we've really made sure that we focus on what we call developer happiness and time to awesome. These kind of go hand in hand. And the idea is that, you don't have time to have to build out these capabilities to store this performance metric data. You're building something really special with your solution already, and you really want to be able to focus on that. And so installing or downloading and installing InfluxDB or any of the components of the TIC stack, super quick, super easy, no dependencies. You can actually start gathering that performance data right away. You can even have it write the data that you're collected into your own application. Maybe you have a smartphone application that has a little charting capability, or you have a web app that has some dashboarding. You can do that very, very quickly and start to see how awesome your application can get with this kind of data. And then finally, we always make sure that, ease of scale out and deployment are also things that we really focus on, because this is all about making your projects successful. And we, like I mentioned, we are a set of projects that actually sit behind the projects that you guys build. So with that, what I want to do is just talk a little bit more with Eric about DevOps monitoring and some of the projects that he has. But if we have we have plenty of time for questions, and so we're more than happy to take a look at those. Alan, do we have any in the queue?
Hey, we certainly do actually. Just trying to make some. Okay, I'm going to try to combine them so they make sense, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So Raghav wanted to know, how do you provide observability? For example, which service, if a service is going down or we haven't received a heartbeat in a long time, is that something that you do as part of what Influx does?
Yeah, so there's a number of different ways that we can provide observability into a solution. And it's going to be dependent on how you're going to actually implement your services. So the easy thing to do, of course, is that we have over 200 Telegraph plugins that that you can already just throw onto whatever it is that you want to monitor. It can be we can be looking at things, all the metrics that you might want to collect in regards to a particular database, or it could be a web server, or it can be a network appliance, etc. So it's really easy to be able to collect all that information and throw that into InfluxDB. The nice thing is then you have a single collection of all that data, and you can start to line them up so that you understand how these different products that you have in place are actually interacting with each other. I think a lot of times we put a lot of this metric data into separate data stores, and so we might be just understanding how well a database is working, but what's important is to understand how the database is interfacing with maybe a web front end or something else. So then, what's nice is that you can then start to, build those linkages to understand, okay, this actually does have an impact on our customers or not. Because sometimes things that might be in kind of a critical state may actually not have any kind of impact on users, and so it's important to understand what's going on there. And then it gets even trickier when you have lots and lots of different solutions that are interfacing with your products. So you might have some third-party SaaS solutions or infrastructure as a service solutions that are providing other capabilities. So really trying to make sure that you can build those linkages is what is going to give you the observability that you need. But it's hard. And as Eric was talking about earlier, we're inserting change at a really rapid pace. So it's really hard to really understand what is the given state of all these different components. So it just takes a lot of patience, a lot of time, and a lot of collaboration to make sure that we can try to build that kind of observability.
Great. All right. Next question is, what's the required level of efforts? It's for the initiative, but he didn't say what initiative it was. But Chris, maybe you could figure that out.
Are you talking about? Pardon me?
I said, if you can't, we have other questions. But if you know the
no, I think we probably need a little more clarification. Are you talking about just the tick stack, or is there something else in reference? Is that question in reference to? If we just get a little more clarification.
All right. If we get it, we will. Next one is, are you using any APM tools with aggregate data, like AppDynamics or something like that?
So, our users definitely use, I have to say, our users are going to be using a lot of different solutions for monitoring because there's going to be different teams that are going to be doing different things. And what they've found over time is initially they realized that, hey, we can actually throw all the metrics that we collect from various APMs or various other monitoring tools, some of them are even open source, and putting them into InfluxDB as a single repository. But then also, we've also heard a number of users that have been able to, and they may not want to get rid of that APM because maybe the teams that are using it are finding that data to be valuable. But I've also heard of a number of users that have been able to actually, take some of the capabilities that the APM has and just use either the client libraries or one of the Telegraph plugins to be able to do that, and then bring that data in without the use of the APM. Doesn't mean that they will completely stop using the APM. What it usually means is that they can then just continue to expand the capabilities of the APM. So instead of just being limited to what they've been doing, they can do even more with the solutions that they have in place.
Great. All right, we've got a bunch more. How would you compare InfluxDB and significant advantages, let's say, to Prometheus?
I think so. On one hand, I think they are very different. I feel like Prometheus was really built to be able to help, especially with Kubernetes and your container orchestration, to make sure that you can help with monitoring how the orchestrator is doing, how the actual containers are doing, making sure that you can then help in putting those containers back up if they have to spin down for whatever reason. You could definitely do a lot of that stuff with InfluxDB and Kubernetes as well. And so in some cases they can seem to be similar. But Kubernetes and Prometheus really go hand in hand. Those are two projects that are supported by the CNCF, and it's usually usually we see users using those together. The way that, if you happen to be using those two projects, the way that we've seen how InfluxDB can interface is that we can be the long-term store for the metrics that are being collected by Prometheus. And that's only going to be important for you if you have some kind of compliance that you have to adhere to within your company. You have to be able to keep that data for long periods of time so that you can report on it, etc. But if you're only using that metrics to just support that container orchestration, you may be completely fine without it. So I've seen us be used with it. I've seen us be used instead of it. I've also seen us used together. So it's and I think the most important thing is use the tools that are right for you and your environment. I don't want to be here and dictate that you have to use us. Make sure that it's going to be something that's going to fit. We don't want to make your life harder. It's all about trying to make your work a lot easier because you're already constrained with so many other things. So I usually see a mixture of all those products within most of our customers' environments.
Excellent. Next question. She's not coming in. You mentioned code instrumentation. What options for collecting metrics and traces from code do you provide?
Yeah, so we have a set of client libraries that a lot of our users use. We actually do have even a couple of papers and documentation that describes how some of our users have done this. But we have Swiss Re as an example where they just wanted to go 100% agentless. So they actually use our JavaScript client libraries to be able to pull a lot of metrics from the code that they were writing so that they can understand, is this code that I'm about to inject into production actually performing well? So they could do some instrumentation in development. They pass that off to the QA team. They can also take a look to make sure there's nothing weird happening, and then they have some reassurances going into production that that code is pretty good. Of course, that kind of instrumenting and metric collecting is usually short-lived. It's not something that would go on forever, because over time, once you know that piece of code is working, you don't need to monitor that. As far as like traces go, we do actually have a couple of really great blogs that talk about how you can implement it. The one thing you do need to be careful with traces is that we're talking about really tiny time intervals. And so you do need to make sure that you are careful with how much you're bringing into InfluxDB, because you could have a high cardinality issue right away. But we in our Influx Cloud infrastructure actually use it for providing tracing for our SRE team so they can see what's going on. And we do have a number of customers that have done that. So there's a couple plugins that support it. The UI in Chronograph doesn't support it elegantly yet, but that's the path that we're going on.
Very cool. All right. So we mentioned AppDynamics before. What other APM tools do you have collectors for? Dynatrace, New Relic, etc.
I mean, most of our collectors are going to be more not so specific to a particular APM that's out there, but they are going to have the same kind of characteristics about what kind of data you can collect. So my recommendation is that you take a look at the telegraph collector agents that are out there, and then also take a look at the use cases that we have articulated on our website, because the great thing about those is they are, well, there's two things that I think that are great about the webinars. The first thing is they are real world experiences from our users, and they will actually share with you what their data infrastructure looks like, what their actual infrastructure looks like. They also do a really nice job of sharing how they're collecting the data. There's a number of examples where they've collected data, they've replaced some of these APMs or these other monitoring solutions, and there's also some great examples of how they use them in parallel. But these webinars and these papers are not a big marketing hype kind of a set of documentation or materials. It's really about helping you get connected with these other people that are doing something that you're probably trying to achieve. And then we also can oftentimes we'll connect various users together either in our community forum or at the various events that we have, because we think that's really important. But it's open source. That's why it's all about, let's build out this community, let's share as much as possible. So I think that's the best place to be able to go to get the answers to your question about how specifically you might be able to pull APM data into InfluxDB.
Very cool. Next one. How to monitor how to monitor Influx database clusters, and why Influx database doesn't support replication in HA mode in Community Edition.
Yeah. My favorite question. Yeah, my favorite question. So yeah, we had to make the tough decision a few years back that we had to figure out how can we monetize this so that we can basically feed the engineering team. And we came to the tough conclusion that clustering is probably something that really, really large organizations are mostly interested in. So we decided that those capabilities would get closed sourced, and if you do want those capabilities, then you would have to pay for that license. There are some alternatives that the community has come up with. So you could definitely try those other there's some other kind of HA type of capabilities are out there that are available from the community. They will require a bit of work, but we also, the other thing to point out is that we also have some really large enterprises that use us just the open source version, and they also haven't had a need for a specific HA. So I know that's kind of a bit of a weird answer, and I apologize. I'm just trying to be really honest with everybody. But I think the best thing is try it out, see how well it performs, and then if we can, we'll definitely try to help you with your HA requirements as best as we can.
Okay, I think last question for now, Chris, and we talked about comparing Influx with Prometheus. How is Influx different from Elastic?
Oh, how is Influx different from Elastic? Yeah, so it's, for us, it's about looking at metrics first and foremost. So it's all about trying to understand what's going on with your solutions. Elastic, to me, is basically a place where you restore your logs. And it just so happens that after you have a big collection of them, then you can start to see some patterns on how systems might be performing. So you can actually generate metrics out of logs. But that's not our approach. Our approach is more about let's help you try to understand what's going on. And then once we have that period time bound, so we know something happened 5 minutes ago, then we can guide you to take a look at the logs or traces or anything else within that time period to try and address it. We're never going to be a place where you're going to store all your logs. You're better off using a Splunk or Elastic or Loggly or any of those other log storage solutions. what we're all about is we just want to be able to provide you with a way to identify if are things going well or not, and then within that time period, if things are not going well, then you should take a look at those things that are going to help you to troubleshoot. So a totally different approach and a totally different product stack. And if anything, you know, you definitely want to still have a log store. There's a number of reasons why you want to keep it. But as I mentioned earlier, just like with Prometheus, you really need to, I think it's important to look at the tool that you're using and making sure that it fits with what you're trying to accomplish. Don't try to force a tool to be something that it's not meant to be. I know there's a lot of times we can kind of make it the way we want it to be, but why waste your time on that? You know, I feel like just be smart with your time. We have so many other things that we have to work at.
I agree wholeheartedly. Agreed. All right, I think that's it. Chris, Eric, thank you so much for a great primer today. I think a lot of people learned, as you can tell from the questions that were out there. I want to wish everyone, including our panelists, a happy holidays, happy and healthy new year. And, you know, to everyone listening to this, thanks for joining us on another great webinar from DevOps.com. Hope to see you soon on another one. Until then, this is Alan Schimmel for DevOps.com. Have a great day. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.